I have been listening to this a lot over the last few days, and I have to say that I was hoping to like it more than I actually did, which is kind of unfortunate because I have to acknowledge that the reason why I had high expectations going into it was because I was reading all these very positive early reviews of it. I think at the time I was listening to the album, it was one of the highest and most acclaimed albums of the years at that point, and it still is up to right now, depending on the publications you look at. And this is not to say that I necessarily put a lot of clout into certain publications. Of course, I am aware of all the biases and all of that, but I just I can't pretend like I wasn't influenced by that, and because normally I don't think I would have actually checked out this Years and Years album because I was quite disappointed by their last album, Communion, and I didn't. I think when I listened to it before, I thought that it was very much in the mold of what a lot of the indie pop music of the time was, and I wasn't very impressed by Olly Alexander's voice. And the reason why I originally went into this listening to Years and Years was because of Olly Alexander, not because of his music work, but because I was familiar with him from this TV show Skins. If you're not familiar with the show, it's like a UK British TV show where in one of the seasons, towards the end, I think he plays this like photographer character along with this character named Cassie. I forgot her name in real life, but she plays Gilly on Game of Thrones. But anyway, so I was familiar with him and checked out his music, and I heard lots of good things about him online. But about the music about Years and Years, and I just was quite disappointed by Communion. And for me personally, Palo Santo sounded kind of like Communion, but just it was better. I think it's better than Communion, but then because it's more intricately produced, it's more textured perhaps, and the songwriting. I don't know how people. I never really understood how people quantify songwriting, but for what it's worth, I thought that the songwriting was maybe just more engaged than it seemed to have been in the last album. I mean, who knows? Probably it hasn't really changed. I'm kind of confused why there's such a big difference in critical. There's a big critical difference between the two albums, with Communion not being as loved as much, and this one being very universally loved. I don't want to be cynical and point to the fact that Olly Alexander is queer. I don't want to really get into that and put that as an example, because I do think that this album is an improvement compared to their last project. But I don't know. I mean, even if you look at it in the perspective of queer music, the Sophie album was incredible. It was, I just, when I think of queer pop, I have to look at the other musicians in the same field of sorts. Was very impressed by the Sophie album. I was a big fan of what else came out this year. I don't really listen to a lot of Ezra Furman, Transangelic Exodus. I was a fan of it. It's not pop, but it's like pop. It's like a rockish pop rock. But I'm a big fan of Ezra Furman. I've seen him in concert a couple of times. He's pretty good. Janelle Monáe, Dirty Computer. There's a lot of these very interesting, I think, explorations of queer identity in other genres, or at least even within the same genre. So I was kind of confused why this was particularly heralded above the rest. But again, I think it's similar to Communion, except I think I very much appreciated the amount of detail in the production. That's what I have to say. That was a big difference from my experience with Communion, and maybe perhaps the reason why I wasn't as in love with this record as I may have been for the others is maybe it has something to do with, I think this record is best. It lives in its most fervent state perhaps in the setting of the club, perhaps. There's very propulsive club beats, and maybe with some kind of some kind of different setting, I would be able to really immerse myself in this environment and just fall into the music, perhaps in a way that people, you may not necessarily have that experience with just listening on your own or with headphones, or without dancing along or something to some degree on some kind of ecstasy like substance or something. It's good. Not, I don't even know what that means to say something is good, but I was enjoying the album more than I did Communion, and overall I think it's quite intricately produced. It is pretty sensual and pretty dancey. I think has very consistent vibe throughout, and I don't even dislike this album. I like the album. It's just that I had these very weirdly high expectations based on the critical reception it was getting, even though Pitchfork trashed the album. But I think they're the only ones who actually didn't like it, I think, from what I understand. Not that Pitchfork means anything, but I don't know. I just thought it would. I just had higher expectations for it, unfortunately, which I should have really just tempered it down based on my own experience with their music before. But it's still pretty decent. I liked the opening track "Sanctify." I thought it really set the stage, and I guess one of the things I have to really think about is I think it sucks that when we classify how we look at pop music or something, the bar that we've gone to in order to say something is good or bad, it seems to just be that they thought it through more or something. It's such a low bar. People say, well, what a great pop album. It's great because they, you could tell it's made in the album setting. There's an opener, there's a closer, there's a thematic structure. It sucks that just the fact that it has certain elements that would make it somehow cohesive is there automatically a semblance of automatically a signal that it is somehow great, which is it's not that I think that all albums need to have that kind of thematic cohesive structure, but just the fact that it has it doesn't mean it's automatically one of the best albums of the year. Many albums that aren't very popular, or pop or not, many albums have some kind of semblance of structure. Just because it has a structure doesn't mean it's particularly a cut above the rest. Perhaps they have the ability to have some kind of structural component to it because they don't have there's not maybe as much of a risk for them, that they don't necessarily have to have all these singles. I mean, I know they had singles, but some artists, the idea is to get more streams, and obviously you have someone like Drake's last album where it's not even really an album of any sorts. It's like how many songs, like 25 songs or something, and there isn't really that much narrative cohesion, but people like it because they like the separate songs. So I mean, maybe it is kind of a good thing that Years and Years seems to be making music towards a fan base that still likes the album format, but I don't know if necessarily it makes it somehow better or worse. Overall, I like the album. It's one of my, maybe the top half of the albums I've listened to this year, but it's hard for me to really just look at it and think it's one of the best albums of the year, or even especially if you kind of put it side by side with the other inventive pop albums over the last few years, even just within this year, there are many others that I find more compelling, and I still have many of the problems I had with the first album, which is that I find Olly Alexander's voice kind of, I don't want to make it sound like this is something music has to have, but it just for me personally, in my own listening to the music, I found it kind of bland, or kind of samey, or just kind of, I felt like, I guess one of the things I feel like for me personally I like with some musicians and artists in terms of the physicality or their voice, I like that sometimes you feel like you can't replace them with anyone else, and if it was someone else, I probably would have not be. I don't even think I can be able to tell Olly Alexander's voice apart from like a crowd of similarly structured pop bands. So I don't know. I mean, I like the album, I think, but there's others that I enjoyed more this year. Check out the Sophie album. Incredibly produced, incredible album. And yeah, I don't know. That's what I thought about the album. Not really that much in depth, really. I liked Sanctify. I think I liked Karma, maybe Lucky Escape, Palo Santo. I think there's a lot of songs I actually quite like. It's just that I had wrong expectations going into it, and unfortunately, I was influenced by the hyperbole of the reviews, and it was not as good as I thought it was going to be, or at least it didn't appeal to me as much as I thought it was going to be, because I thought it would be very much different from Communion. So yeah, anyway, that's what I thought.